and welcome to the 51st episode of Retropower Uncut. So next week we'll be doing this for a year. So I hope somebody's enjoying it. It seems from all the comments that you do enjoy watching us, what we've been up to each week. So thank you for the support. We're going to start in this amazing new workshop space. So if you've been following us over the last few weeks, we've been going through the traumas of getting this workshop space ready, and now I think the wall came out. I don't know if the wall was out in the last episode. Yes, it was. But we weren't actually using anything in here because we'd only just painted the floor. We were a bit worried whether it was a bit too tacky to use. But as of Monday, toolboxes in here, workbenches in here, and cars in here. And you can now see more clearly what we've been aiming for. There's essentially 4 build bays. There's one out of shop behind me here. Those far two will have 2-post ramps on them, which we hope to be in-ground flush ones. They weren't because of groundwork complications. They should be going in the next couple of weeks. And then there's a bay with a pit, which is underneath the Jag, which we've yet to actually use for anything, I don't think. But the beauty of the pit is it doesn't get in the way when you're not using it. And a few people, I think I saw a comment last time saying, you know, why are you using a pit? Why not a 4-post lift? And you know, rightly identified the fact that one of the benefits of the pit is being able to see the car with the weight on its wheels versus a 2-poster, which obviously you can also do with a 4-post lift. The downside of the 4-post lift is it takes up an enormous amount of space, and if you're actually trying to do any work on the car that isn't looking at the underside of it, it's almost impossible to do because it's totally in the way. The pit's actually, in my opinion, considerably better because you get all the advantages of being able to work under the car with the weight on the wheels, but when you're just working on the car in a normal fashion, working inside it or on the outside of it like we have been over the last week, it doesn't get in the way at all. You wouldn't even know it was there. And that's actually the reason we went for a short pit. It's only 3 metres, so it's completely within the confines of the car, so you're not risking falling into it when you're just working on the car normally. And of course, for us, it's no hardship to move the car forward and back to work on different parts of the underside if needs be. So, what have we been up to? So the Jag, it's basically been the exterior chrome work, which I've kind of got used to seeing it now, but I remember a few days ago when we first kind of had the majority of it on, I couldn't believe what a big transformation it had made. I mean, you kind of get used to the little trim holes that are all down the side of the car, and it suddenly looks so much more finished. I kind of now can't wait to see the windscreen because I think that might have the same effect. But it's certainly been a long and perilous journey to get here. You sort of forget, even with all the work that went into mocking up these trims to make sure they were all a perfect fit before it was even painted, you forget how much more care you now have to take now it's actually painted. And they're all attached by little rivets that go into the body that have a kind of, if you like, a sort of tapered head on them that has a taper out and then back in, so that the channel section of these trims kind of pushes over, expands out past the widest point and then goes back to a narrower point beyond that. Which means basically meticulously cleaning out every hole for any excess paint build-up so that the rivets fit, and then riveting, I don't know how many there are, but there's a lot of rivets on the car. And then that's just, I didn't envy James's job of doing those, because anybody who's done pop rivets will know that the tendency for when you finally pop the rivet to skip over to the side is high. Now we've been using an air riveter, which is a lot more controllable, but it's still quite perilous. So he was taking his time and being very thorough with those. We also did the final fit of the door frames. We had those basically in. But there's a section which we'd left underneath here. It needs sealing onto the door itself so that water doesn't flow down and down the inside of the door. On here it's okay, it just flows down inside the door, which is intended, and drains out the bottom. On this front section under the quarter light and also under the rear opening quarter lights, the door frame, the door skin and frame actually continues right through. So you need to seal that section, otherwise you'll get water going down the inside of the door card. So we didn't want to do that until we'd done the final fitment of these chrome trims, because we were fairly sure we were going to need to move these up or out the way completely to drill and get these rivets in here. So yeah, with these trims done, that sealant's been done, frames are on for the final time. So yeah, really excited on all of that. The dash, I mean, Nat did show the dash going in last time. It was pretty much completed Friday last week. and it was just awesome. Actually, on the Saturday, I put the Jag in here. I was confident enough with the floor paint was dry by the Saturday. I think we painted the floor on the Wednesday. And I got to sort of stand back with the lights on in here and admire the dash, and I'm so sort of proud of it, really. Every part of that dash and almost every part of the interior is made from scratch. So the dash top is handmade in steel by Stu, the dash bottom section handmade in steel, obviously those bits then upholstered, the demist vents are machined, the dash fascia panels, which are hydro dipped with the wood grain, are handmade in aluminium, screen surround, all the mounting hardware behind there. The instruments were custom made to our design, and then the thing that we're going to see come together over the next sort of week or so is the centre console, which is largely James's design in terms of how it all constructed. We've now had the wood grain done on that. We're just waiting on a part to be anodised, so there's a machined part which forms the sort of underneath layer that you can see some of through the wood fascia, and also the vertical panel. Again, there's an aluminium panel that's black anodised behind there. We just wanted to do a brush finish on those before we sent them for anodising, which has been done, so they're going to go for anodising next week. Once they're back, all of that lot can go together, so just can't wait to see it all kind of go together inside now. James is just working on the mounting of the wood cappings at the top of the door here at the minute, so they should be ready to go on by next week. So yeah, mega excited to see all that come together. Let's go over here. Kaiser 2. You probably might have seen it in the background in a couple of the last videos. We're doing some revisions on the rear suspension on that. So it's just sat there at the minute because I'm waiting for some work that Bill Stein are doing for us on it. Just doing a slight change on the damper rates in the back, moving the circlip groove that holds the airbags 10mm up so we can run a slightly lower pressure to get the same ride height. And we're making a revision to the lower bushes that attach the dampers to the rear arms on that, just because we weren't happy with the refinement of the rear suspension on that. Chevette, that's what we've also been progressing with. I was obviously mega excited to get it through here, out of paint and ready to crack on with the build. Monday, I think it was, Max from Bremax came over, did all the measure up for the wiring loom, so he's now cracking on with that. As is always the case, we kind of planned the wire routing when it was at the metalwork stage. So for instance, the reason this wing is removed is because there's a wire routing down here, comes out from the PDU, which is mounted on the inside of that kick panel, through a grommet here, along these bosses that are welded to the wing, back in through this grommet, there's bosses across the front. So all of the wire routing has already been planned and provision made for it. So it's just a case of Max coming out, measuring everything up, seeing what connectors are needed on different parts, and going away, doing the schematic, the drawing for it, and actually constructing the wiring loom itself. So looking forward to seeing that all come together. Scott has been working on various parts which sort of relate to electronic components actually. We're using Motec electronics on this, so it's got a Motec, I think it's C127, probably got that wrong, dash digital display, which will sit above the steering column. It's got a Motec engine ECU and a Motec PDM, 15-channel PDM, and then a Motec keypad. The keypad's going to sit on the tunnel more or less where it's lying there at the moment, but on some little billet machine brackets that'll raise it up above the handbrake master cylinder. You know, the idea there is it falls to hand nicely, but it'll also slightly hide the plumbing to the handbrake master cylinder, which will make that whole installation look a little neater. There's also going to be some CAN bus button pads on the steering wheel, and we won't be having any stalks at all, so that relates to a job Scott's been on with this week. He's been remaking the upper outer column for the Corsa electric power steering unit that's in it. So it's a Corsa B electric power steering module, and the upper column normally has a plastic piece on the top, which is the switch gear, the column switch gear, and it also holds the upper column bearing. So what we do is, on this one, and we've done it on another car before where we got rid of the stalks, we make a complete new tube for the upper column, machine a little bearing housing that's welded into the end of it with an internal circlip groove, so we can circlip a bearing into the top there, and also incorporate the mount that bolts it to the dash into that. So it's just a completely clean unit then, it has no kind of OEM complicated unnecessary parts, and also we weld the mount onto the top of that for the digital display. So this week Scott's made that entire upper column piece, bearing housing, got it all welded up, done the mount for the display, so we've got the mount for the Motec piece on there, and then that's now been removed to be painted. Also, on the subject of electronics. He's been doing the panels that sit in each kick panel area to mount the PDM, the ECU, and the power steering ECU. Now, if you remember the metalwork phases of this car, we made CAD drawings for and mock-up plates that allow, or locating plates that allowed us to weld the bosses into the kick panels. And this is where that technique comes into its own, in that we drew the sort of hole spacings for the mounting bosses, drew a mock-up panel that had big cutouts in it next to each boss, so you could literally bolt the bosses onto the panel, hold the panel up, but the access holes allowed you to then weld those bosses in with the panel in situ. Those panels are then removed and discarded because they were just welding jigs. But because we've got a CAD file with the hole centers, we can then generate the CAD file for the final panel, which is another thing Scott's been on with this week. So he CAD'd up and plasmed out the aluminium panels that will mount the components I talked about. Made up the bracket that straps the power steering ECU onto that one. This one's got some holes for riv nuts that the Motec units bolt directly to. Once we were happy with all of that, he's just given them a good sand and then basically brushed a 320 grit brush finish into them, ready for anodizing, which will go for anodizing with the bits of UTAR that need anodizing. Also did some finishing on the headlamp brackets. This car's going to have Hella xenon units, bi-xenons, 4 of them at the front there. We'd already done the mounting brackets for them, but they just needed the final metal finishing and brushing ready for anodizing, so they'll be going away for anodizing as well. So that's pretty much where we're at. I know I got a picture earlier this week from Richard Stubley at Autodesk. He's just about finished machining the center console unit, which is the brake and clutch reservoir and the surround for the gear stick as one kind of complete unit. So I'm really looking forward to getting that here, and that's really what we're waiting for to send off all of that anodizing batch. So yeah, that's where we're at on that. We're going to crack on with the general build work on that, and we'll see where we're at next week. Stratos, been waiting in the wings while we had all this carnage going on in the workshop, but we should be back on with that pretty imminently. We're going to carry on with the interior construction on that, and then moving towards IVAing it, which is really the next step, is getting it drivable, interior complete, drivable, then work towards what changes we might need to do for the IVA test. No doubt there'll be some temporary changes which are undone, as there often are. For anybody who's done an IVA test, they'll know what I'm talking about. The Mustang. So we've been just slogging away with the construction or rebuild work on this, should I say. It's relatively slow going. I think one thing we perhaps haven't really talked about on this project before is that originally it was only actually booked in for basically a body shell restoration, so it was metalwork and paint. And then towards the end of that process, the owner said, oh, actually, can you carry on and do the rebuild as well? But it's been a very challenging one because the owner had stripped the car 99% himself, and because you can basically buy everything new for these, he'd pretty much thrown most of the old parts away and then gone about ordering all new stuff. But that does generate a lot of complication. I mean, one, we're very meticulous with our strip down photos, so we've got references on all these cars we've never worked on before. We've got a reference of how everything was. But because we haven't got those, there's a lot of research. Every part you come to, you kind of have to look online and see. I mean, obviously things like lights are just bolted in, but when it comes to the complexities of plumbing parts and that sort of thing, especially when all the parts aren't necessarily there. So one of the things, for example, we've been working on is the power steering installation and the transmission cooler, and the fuel plumbing as well. And it's sort of working out where that originally went, how it should be clipped. The power steering as a particular example of how these things can sometimes work out when they're being done this way. The owner ordered some power steering pipes for it, new, but they were actually for the wrong type of power steering, because these had, some of them had a power steering box. This one, which I guess is the earlier type, had essentially a manual steering box, but then the power assistance was an add-on hydraulic ram and sensing unit that basically powered the drag link back and forth. So the steering lines were the wrong ones. So then it's, can we get those new? Are they going to be any good? We looked at the original arrangement on it and thought, well, to be honest, it's not a great arrangement anyway. Essentially, the whole hydraulic unit moves with the steering. So every time you steer, it's flexing the pipes that attach to it that go to the pump. And they had like a sort of 6 or 8 inch section of hard line to start with, which transitioned to rubber line after that. which didn't look like a great idea to us. It's constantly flexing that, so it's trying to make little improvements in the way things are mounted and bracketed. Same with the transmission cooler lines. We wanted to do braided lines for reliability, so making a really nice way of routing those and bracketing them to suitable parts of the shell or the engine. Yeah, it's just absorbing time. Another example is on these rear lights. Great new units, look lovely, but obviously they're only red, and on this year a car in the UK you need amber indicators. So we suggested to the owner that these reverse lights, clear lens reverse lights, we could potentially use those, swap the bulbs over to amber bulbs, repurpose those as indicators, and actually the reverse lights aren't an MOT requirement, they're just convenient to be able to see behind you when you're reversing, but he said he was happy for us to do that, so that's another thing we've been on with on this. So yeah, basically it's a challenge when you're sort of given a car that you've never worked on before, and a box of incomplete new parts for it, but it's a challenge we're sort of proud to be rising up to, and it is all going in the right direction, so can't really wait to see that take shape a bit further. Here's a big change. Obviously with the things that are going on at the moment, the new space, and we're prepping for the new paint booth to be built next door, everything that was under the mezzanine next door has now been moved in here. So there are 3 cars back in here now which were originally lurking under the mezzanine, one of which is Nat's Range Rover. So perhaps at some point we'll actually do an episode about our own cars. It's something that gets requested a lot. Most of us have got a number of cars in various states of dilapidation, but this is Nat's Range Rover, which a while ago had a Mercedes OM 606 turbo diesel engine in it. Plans have changed, that engine's gone, and I believe a deposit has been put on an LS3, so this is going to be LS3 powered. So hopefully at some point we'll see some progress on that. Right, follow me through. Mugs. Going out the door very nicely, so thanks a lot to all those who have bought a mug. There's plenty more in stock, so go onto our shop on the website, retropower.co.uk. And apologies for those who are after international shipping. At the moment we're still in the process of trying to sort that out. It's obviously not that difficult to ship internationally, it's more automating the process so that we don't have to put half an hour of time into each shipping transaction. So I've surprised Jarkle massively here by going completely the wrong side of the car compared to what we said we were going to do. But this is what Tom has been working on. I think he was working on the transmission tunnel and getting the sort of initial elements of it in place last week, and he's just been carrying on with that. So carrying on with the metal shaping. I think last week the top section hadn't been grafted into the side sections. That's now all done, and the various bits of metal finishing to smooth out the areas where he joined the two. He's been working on the front extension section, and then the way of transitioning that fairly flat top to a rounded tunnel top to meet up with the bulkhead. And he's just finished that part. He was asking me today whether we should smooth that all in or leave that as a spot welded piece with a seam, and I actually said I think it might look neat as a separate piece with a visible seam there, spot welded in. Run the danger of the shape starting to look a bit too organic and curvy. So I think that's the plan on that. He's just been doing the holes that'll mount it to the flange underneath, so that'll be a bolt-on piece. And then the next step is going to be the shifters. So the 2 shifters, one for the main transmission shift and the other one for the range change, will be mounted onto the top here. We've got a rough idea of how we're going to do it. Next step really is going to be offering up the shifter unit that we're going to use, getting it into a position we're happy with versus the driving position, and then looking at exactly how we're going to mount it. The Landcruiser box originally was rod shift. I think we're going to, for both actually, for the range change and the main change, and I think we're going to change that around and do cables for it. Primarily because I'm not mad keen on, I don't want to mount the shifters onto the gearbox because you get the vibration of the engine coming through in the shifters, which I think, although was probably in keeping with the original ethos of these, it's not going to be ideal if we're trying to make it a bit more refined. And I didn't really like the idea of having a solid rod shift with the shifter mounted on the body and the gearbox obviously being isolated from that via not only the rubber bushes between the body and the chassis, but also those between the transmission and the chassis. So there's a lot of relative movement there, which I was not mad keen on either. Kind of in my mind, it ran the risk of actually, with enough movement of the engine or of the car, actually pulling it out of gear. So we're going to, I think, do a cable shift for both on those. So it's just working out how to mount those, where the two stick positions are going to be, and then we're going to come up with a nice sort of elegant housing that covers the actual mechanism of the shifter and just has the stick coming through. So next week, hopefully, we'll have made a start on that. We've had the wings arrive as well. Convenient. Oh, this was all intentional, shooting this shot this way because the wings are in the background. I think we showed the fact that these were, the original wings were hiding a lot of horrors last week. Really, really bad pitting on the top, which had just been filled over, and quite a lot of previous repairs, some of which were okay, some of which less so. The owner found that there was a place in Portugal where you could get new pressings from, so those have just arrived, so we'll probably do a mock-up of those next week as well and do a kind of mock-up build of the front end. So that's where we're at on that. Let's go this way. CV8, you probably noticed, has been paused for a few weeks now. That's essentially because the next steps on that are really bodywork related. Starting to do all the prep work, essentially body prep on it to take it to the point almost it would be paintable, but then to take moulds off that for the new body. So because the guys are finishing off the last project to go through the paint process, that's kind of on hold for the moment, but I think in the next few weeks we'll be back on with that. Morris, that's what Stu's been busy with. So he was finishing off the bonnet latches last week, which he's done. He's happy with those. I'm happy with those, so that's looking good. It's basically a pair of spring-type catches that come down one each side. Very reminiscent of old series Jaguar XJs, actually. So there'll be a twin cable going to a single lever in the cabin to open that. The springs obviously pop the bonnet up when you release it, then it's just reach under one side. There's a safety catch one side for that. The actual spring and safety catch mech is basically a modified Mark 1 Golf arrangement. One side will have removed the safety, so there's only one side. But the actual latching part and all the housing for that is completely fabricated by Stu, so he's done a nice job of that. Then he moved on to the back end. So we've been umming and ahhing about this lower valance section for quite a long while. Originally it kind of curves in and then had a little downward flange with spot weld marks all the way along it. Now we'd taken out the inner layer of that, so the spot welds weren't actually spot welds anymore, it was just the marks from when they were done, and we'd had a discussion previously about should we smooth them out or should we reshape the rear valance, and we really couldn't quite decide. And then I had a discussion with the owner when he was down here, and we were talking about fog and reverse lights and how we were going to incorporate those. And we'd originally thought about having them actually hanging underneath. But then we decided it might be quite a nice way to resolve that rear valance if we refabricate it and actually incorporate them in. So we've reshaped the rear valance completely, pretty much the whole width of it slightly, and done these little slot cutouts, each of which will house a LED reverse and fog light unit. So that's looking really nice. And then with that done, Stu's moved on to some of the interior stuff. So the handbrake, that was one thing. Handbrake lever, if you probably hadn't noticed before, but that was one of the things missing from the inside. So we've used a Mark 1 Escort handbrake lever, which was just exactly what we wanted. It bolts down to a flat surface. The mounting tabs kick over to the right-hand side of the lever, which is what we wanted because we wanted the lever over to one side, so we could get some components of the interior next to it. So it was the ideal shape for us. So Stu's done the mounting for that, and then that allowed us to then move on to designing the centre console piece, which is what he's just about to start. So I sat in it earlier and had a conversation with Stu about the layout. We're clear now on how we're going to do everything there. It's going to be a fabricated steel console that runs all the way from the dash fascia there all the way back to behind the handbrake. It'll be sculpted out around the handbrake, so the handbrake will almost sit flush with it, so it's not very intrusive, but it'll still have a good cutout to get a hand around it. Cup holders, one in front of the other next to the handbrake. Then there'll be the climate control panel and another little switch panel, which we're going to mimic the shape of the climate control panel, which will have hazard warning light, start button, fog light switch, and then potentially one more which we could just use for another purpose, spare button, or we might just put 3 in. Then there'll be round gear gated bezel, and then in the area in front of that we're going to do a sort of recessed tray which you could put your phone in. Might do a cordless charger in there. We have done that on a couple of cars. Kaiser 1 and 2 both have cordless phone chargers. I'm just trying to think whether UTAR does. Yes, it does. So we might do that. Up to the owner really on that one. It's right next to the head unit, which has a USB socket in it anyway, so you could just plug a cable into that. But that's certainly the plan. Fabricated in steel, it'll be upholstered in leather, the same as the lower section of the dash. So yeah, looking forward to Super Stu working his magic on that. And I think on that note, that's probably it for this week. We'll catch you next week for the 1 year anniversary of Retropower Uncut. See you then.
This one I